take a walk outside of the Grand Canyon Concourse and walk toward where the area is that's heading toward the Bay Lake Towers that's there, we can kind of get a view of the monorail coming into the contemporary resort. And you can see the Magic Kingdom off in the distance over there. Really pretty amazing. Now as we walk along this terrace, what you'll see is that you can actually see the monorail exiting the contemporary like that, where it goes along on the path and goes toward the Magic Kingdom. This is the direction where it's the express loop that goes toward the Magic Kingdom. But you'll also see the monorails come in from the resort loop coming the other way. But as we walk along, what we're able to see is where the switch is. And that reminds me that we need to do a video completely about the switching operations and how that works, because it's kind of interesting. You're moving concrete and you're doing something kind of cool. So it's worth talking about, spending a few minutes on talking about how you're actually able to move that beam to switch monorails on and off, because you have 12 monorails that reside on 3 lines, and you need to be able to take them on and off for maintenance and other reasons, you know, storm preparation, whatever else. So you need to be able to move the monorails on and off the line periodically. So that's how they do it, is they do it via these switches. There are 2 switches here at the Magic Kingdom, well, 2 at Disney World. One is here, right out there, where I'll show you in just a moment. And the other one is over by the Transportation and Ticket Center that goes over to EPCOT. So you have these 2 different switches that are able to move the trains back and forth among the various lines they need to go onto. So let's talk about how those switches work and how that all comes together, because it's kind of an interesting topic that I think is worth spending a little bit of time on. The monorail system at Walt Disney World is comprised of several different tracks that go around and take guests to different places. Now, it only goes around toward the Magic Kingdom on the Express Loop and the Resort Loop, and then heads over to Epcot. They never built any future monorails to go any other places. So to orient ourselves, let's start all the way at the top where the roundhouse is and work our way down to the different switches. So if we go out to the roundhouse, here's a little video I collected at some point when I was back on the Behind Our Steam Trains tour. And you can see the monorail coming in, and there's actually several different beams above that allow the monorails to come in and out of the roundhouse. Have to make sure the track is secured in that spot. And of course, they're switched here so the monorail can go on a specific beam in order to be in a specific place in the roundhouse. And most of these beams are just for storage, but a couple of them are specific to having the monorail stop in for a paint job or for wheel repair or for engine repair or anything else. So there's some specific beams that they use for those things. But here's a monorail coming into the roundhouse, having come from one of the switches and working its way back. Now that we've been out at the roundhouse and kind of seen what it looks like, let's head over into where the switches are. So if we look at the overall map again, we can see that there's 2 switches, one that's up closer to where the roundhouse is. This is the original switch. This is the one that allows for monorails to come from the roundhouse and join either the express loop or the resort loop that goes between the various resorts, the Transportation and Ticket Center, and the Magic Kingdom. So we're going to take a look at that one first in terms of the context. And as we see the overall route planning. We can see that this goes around the Seven Seas Lagoon and stops at the various resorts, and the Magic Kingdom and the Transportation and Ticket Center. There is a Walt Disney World monorail system map that exists that kind of gives you that sense of direction and everything too. Now, if we take the Google Earth view and we follow the tracks, we can see that it goes along sort of on the outside of the Magic Kingdom, over by where Space Mountain is, and then heads around and catches up to a switch right between the Magic Kingdom and the Contemporary Resort Hotel. And now that we have the context for what it looks like, let's zoom in and play around with my Walt Disney World monorail toy a little bit to give a different perspective on how the switch actually works. So this is the resort loop, and this is the express loop. And this line over here, where we have the track that stops, that would be the one that goes off toward the roundhouse. Now, you're standing on the walkway between the Contemporary Resort and the Magic Kingdom. So you can see the Magic Kingdom would be off to the left, and the Contemporary Resort would be off to the right. In normal operations, the train on the express loop would go this direction, and then the train on the resort loop would go this direction. So now let's move it around as though the switch is moving. In this case, what happens is that the beam moves over between the resort loop to the express loop, and the one from the express loop moves over to where the roundhouse is. So then your train would come on from the roundhouse, and that puts the monorail on the express loop, and it will continue around going around the express. But if you want to move the monorail to the resort loop, there has to be another switch that's made, and this is where you switch it back and essentially move the monorail over from the express loop to the resort loop so that it can make its loop around that way. And that would be done like this. It's just switching it again so that it moves over from one loop to the other. Pretty straightforward and simple, and essentially the loop moves over. Once it's over, then the switch will switch back, and you can move on from there and resume normal operations. The reverse is also true with the way it works. These switches just move back and forth to move it between the beams, so they can put monorails on and off the tracks during the day or night to move back and forth as they need more monorails to do different operations, or at the end of the day when they're moving them back into the roundhouse. So this is pretty much how it works. This is how the system operates and how normal operations would work within the confines of the switch. So you kind of get a sense of how it looks. So I use this just to give a little perspective on how it comes together and how it switches back and forth. The backward operation works exactly the same way that way. Now, that's kind of neat and it all kind of works, but let's take some different views of it from different places where you can actually see what's going on. We're going to start by going up to the 4th floor of the Contemporary and taking a look out to where the switching operations happen. Monorail Silver is passing the switch right now, and Monorail Green, I guess that's lime actually, is going to enter the line. So they'll make the switch to bring it over. exciting. We got an extra whammy there. So you can see he's through the switch now, so they're going to switch it back and he will continue on the line. And now normal operations resume. But that's not the only place you can see it. You can actually go down to where the bus loop is. And where you're standing near the buses, you can actually see the monorail operation happening there as well. It's kind of neat to be able to look at it from there as you just happen to be standing there waiting for a bus. Once in a while you get lucky and you get to see it from there. The view is actually slightly better from here than it is when you're standing directly underneath it, but as you'll see in just a moment, standing underneath it is actually pretty cool too. So just to give you the sense again of where that switch is, let's just zoom back in using the Google Maps and let's see where it is and where the location is that you can stand and actually watch it. It's on the walkway between the Contemporary and the Magic Kingdom. You just kind of walk along and you'll see that there's kind of a switching point. It's a little hard to see, but you can manage to see it if you're a little tall or you stand at an angle, or maybe you hold your phone up a little bit. But here's what it looks like. And you go up there and you can actually see the switch right above your head. And here's a switching operation that I happen to be lucky enough to catch one afternoon. And you can see the monorail switching onto the line. So they switched the switch. Monorail Orange is moving onto the line here from the switch. So you'll see him come across in just a second. He's just out of view. There he is. Monorail Orange is coming on the line now. So they stopped all the other monorails that were on the line to get Orange on there. Made it over just after they switched the switch. He's going to come on carefully. All the other monorails on the line will be stopped at this point. So they're just waiting. He'll come on. He's halfway on. And he'll move off the beams that are there. And they'll switch it back so they can continue normal operation. Okay, here comes the last car. Here comes the reverse cab. Coming on now. There's the reverse cab. Just came on. So that's cool. So Monorail Orange is now on the line. Now, of course, the monorails going the other way can still continue to move because they're not affected by the beam switch. So Monorail Blue is coming the other way. You'll see him switch on, just come across in just a second. There you go. There's Monorail Blue coming through here. After he comes through, they'll switch it back. Now that was way cool. So this end is hinged, obviously, so they can make the switch. Monorail Orange is just waiting there now that now it's been cleared. So it's amazing what they can do because it's a concrete beam. I mean, it's poured concrete, but they have the hinge at one end, and they have the little pulls at the other end that they can pull it across. Now that the shop operator has to check the panel, make sure everything's switched, has to get visual confirmation from at least one other person that it's been switched, then they can resume normal operation. But that's it. That's what there is to it. There's also an opportunity, if you're truly lucky, to see it happening while you're riding the Walt Disney World Railroad around the outside of the Magic Kingdom, because as you pass Space Mountain, you actually can see the switch from there. It really does take a fair amount of luck to get that one at the right time. Unfortunately, there's no way to stand out there and watch it. You just have to catch it at just the right moment if you happen to be riding the railroad. Now, there's another view that you used to be able to get, and that was from the cab of the Walt Disney World monorail, where you might have been lucky enough to have stopped and seen the monorail operation happen. Here's a video that someone took where we actually can see this happening from the cab. It's kind of cool.
Unfortunately, that doesn't exist anymore. Because of the accident that happened, you can't ride up front any longer, but it's still kind of neat that we have this historical documentation of what it looked like. And now let's go over and look at the second switch. This is the switch that goes from the Transportation and Ticket Center off to the EPCOT line. Now this was built in 1980 or 81 when they were building the EPCOT monorail, so it was something that was added to the Transportation and Ticket Center. And as you look at it, you realize that it goes off in a loop and comes around directly from the Transportation and Ticket Center, goes around Future World, and then comes back on the other side and rejoins at the Transportation and Ticket Center. It's just one long loop. And this is the second switch, right here by the Transportation and Ticket Center. This is the one that puts the monorails onto the EPCOT line, though there's another spur where they have to connect a little bit further up. But you get the idea. This is the other part of how they connect the monorails up. And it looks like this if you happen to be standing at the end. You can kind of get a sense of what it looks like. Now, if we kind of follow along again on the Google Earth, we can see how this works. We come along to the Transportation and Ticket Center, and here's where we start off with the switch. And again, if I switch down to my toy train, I can really see how it works.
We have to make believe a little bit and take a little bit of exception with some of these things because the model really doesn't sell itself in terms of what the EPCOT line does. So when I look at it, I would assume that this one here, this line, would be the EPCOT loop. So it goes out and around, and then catches up and goes on down to EPCOT. And then would come back and come back through the same station. So that's the way that would work. This one that the train is on currently, so that's the express loop, and then this is the resort loop. So to get to the EPCOT line, what has to happen is you have to switch out and get to the other line. So the line would go, basically you'd have the express line going this way, it would go up and go past, and the train would go through, just like it would normally, like this. And it would stop there. Then the switch would switch it out to the spur line for EPCOT. So this would then go this way. So it would switch out to the spur line for EPCOT this way. And again, pardon the sort of design a little bit. It's a little weak in the way I did it, but I think it paints the picture. So then this would go up this way and would join the spur line. So it would be switched on to go to the spur line. It would go around on the spur line like this. Would continue on the spur line and would get to a place where it's just past where the switch would be. So that would be about here. So what has to happen is this has to move off like this. And then this would switch over to here like this, using the switch, same operation as we saw before, essentially, and it would be there. Now, it's on the monorail line, but the problem is you have to get it back into the station and you have to change the order of operations here. Everybody has to move to be on the other side. So this train has to go back then, like this. It's on the monorail line, that's all good. And then it would stop here. This would be the platform here. That'd be the platform. Let's just say this is the platform. The driver would get out, and now the train would, for normal operations, the switch would switch back to here to take it out to EPCOT consistently. And it would switch on to here again. So now it would go on to EPCOT. And the spur line is now detached. So that's essentially what happens.
So if you really stop and think about the logistics of how this works, it's a loop, and the monorail's going in a direction. The only way to connect up to that line is to have a spur line that connects at either end that allows the monorail to join up to that loop. So the way they did that was to create this spur line that goes over between where the Transportation and Ticket Center is and part way along the loop where it reconnects to the monorail. So there's actually two parts to this switch to make it work. This is a really cool engineering feat that allows them to connect back up to the main line while moving a monorail back and forth and being able to use the switch to take it from the roundhouse down to this line, then connect up to the spur line that then connects up to the EPCOT line. And it's a little confusing, I know, but it works in the sense of the dynamics of the engineering allow for the monorail to go in a direction. When you want to reverse it, the operation is exactly the reverse. It just changes away and does the exact opposite thing. Bring it back onto the track and bring it around. So it would go like this. So it would come to the end here, so that it would be attached to there, and now the monorail can go back into the station. Like this, through that way. Then the monorail will come through the switch like this. And then once it's come through, then it stops. And then it would go back to here like this. If you want to take it off the line, you would do that, and then bring it up. And it would head toward the contemporary and then over to the other switch to move it back to the roundhouse. So that's the way that would work. And there are a couple of ways to see this. The first is, again, from the cab. And this is from a video that I created a long time ago when we were still able to ride up front. You can see the spur line going off to the right there and goes around to connect up to the EPCOT line. And you can see the other side of the spur line. As you go along on the EPCOT line, you can see where the spur connects back up. And this, again, is from someone else's video that I'm sharing here, but you get a sense of where the connection point is to go back on the line. Because you have to be able to come on and off of this line and head back to the express loop to be able to get to the roundhouse, there has to actually be a second switch here. So this one's coming up. You can see the spur line coming on our left here, and it will come up and connect up sort of a little bit further up. You'll see where the switching point is. Now they're coming closer, and this is where you would switch back to get on that spur line. So the operation to get people on and off of the line is really pretty cool. So it's fairly easy to see how the resort and express loops work. They're pretty straightforward in terms of you switch onto one line or switch onto the other, go back to the roundhouse, and so forth. But this idea of switching to the EPCOT line is a little more convoluted, a little more complicated, because you actually have two switches. You have to come from the express loop, have to switch over to this spur line, then switch over to the EPCOT loop. And so I thought to show that in a little more detail, I'd show you this Trainz simulation. So there's some software called Trainz that some people basically hacked up and created a monorail simulation out of a train simulator. And it's really pretty clever that way. It's really neat. Now, to be fair, years ago, I had downloaded a copy of the Trainz software and started playing around with the monorail edition that you can put onto it. Someone had basically written it up and put it out there in a public forum so you could play around with it. And I did, and I enjoyed playing with it for a little while. But to get the detail and the complexity of everything right is a little more complicated than I wanted to take on. I just enjoyed playing with it for a little while and kind of seeing it. But other people have taken it a lot further. So here's one video that I found that really explains how the whole monorail switching operation works to EPCOT. And I wanted to share that with you because I think it's really pretty cool. Link is below to his actual video so you can see the whole thing. He did a lot more than just this part of it, but it's really pretty neat, and I wanted to share this with you because it's just so interesting the way this whole switching operation works. And I think it gives it a better context than me just talking about it or even showing it with my toy. You get a better sense of it from actually watching it in what looks like reality asterisk. I know it's not reality, but it's a pretty good rendering that makes it look a lot like reality. then one last thing to leave you with. The actual switching of the beams, that movement that makes the beam move from one track to another. That's actually done remotely at the roundhouse. There's a control panel that allows for that to happen. There's some buttons they push and some levers that they pull to make the switching actually happen. There has to be good coordination between the person working in the roundhouse, the pilot who's in the train, and the person who's working in the control center to make sure that everything's clear and everything's right and there's no concerns there. But that's the topic for another video where we talk about the safety and some of the accidents that have happened over the years. That'll work. To make one clarifying point, everything I've done in these videos, everything that you'll see in here, everything that I've got included in the monorail videos, comes mostly from videos that I took myself. If I took them from somewhere else, I note where they came from. And the second thing is, I just wanted to clarify that every one of these comes from a publicly available space. I don't go behind any closed doors or do anything awkward. This is all places that you can stand. Security will tell you it's okay if you're standing in these places. So just wanted to clear that up so you have that understanding too. So you can go and kind of recreate this if you want to, and go see these same places by just standing around on the 5th floor of the Contemporary, or down by the switch, or wherever you might happen to go.